What's going on, everybody? It's Freedo and Weagle back again for your Moira watch for another meta discussion talking about Moira, but this time not just specifically about her, but today we're going to be taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture, the butterfly effects that the new character is going to bring to the meta game, what team comps does it enforce, and also what strategies, synergies, and counters that we can think of that are going to be affecting your ranked play before you know it. I believe Thursday is probably the day for that. So we've been able to test a lot with Moira ourselves, as well as watch the pros play, at least in a scrim environment. And the trouble with taking scrims is that oftentimes you'll see a bit more flippant usage of abilities and styles, but even with that, I think some conclusions can be made thus far, and I think the most exciting one, of course, is that there seems to me to be a bit of a support triangle, which I'll try to unpack that as we go along talking. But I don't think there's necessarily a top-tier support duo, but more combos of duos that you can work in for different situations and purposes, and that's what's really cool about having this conversation. But the main question that we get asked oftentimes is, how does Moira interact with a comp like Triple Tank? And I think that's where I'm going to start this conversation and then branch out from there.
So for me, I've been looking at people play Moira, and it's definitely important to be careful when you watch scrimming pros play these things, because a lot of the time you're watching two teams with a Moira playing against each other. But what happens if the other team doesn't have a Moira, but you do? So that's where it opens up some interesting interactions, is when there's a real competitive, not just a testing game, but a full competitive try to win game. But one thing that Moira does, and we mentioned this in another video, but I wanted to explain it a bit more, is her actual burst healing. And people said not to call it burst healing, but it is. Her multiple target burst healing is the most in the game that one character can do. Now, if she heals someone and throws an orb at them, then it's like 135 on multiple targets healing per second, whereas Ana can do slightly more than that, I believe, on one target, which is of course a lot more useful when shooting one target. But when we talk about a comp like Triple Tank, which is already strong, by the way, I mean, a lot of people do run it, you can even see it in matchmaking as well, and then you bring someone like Moira in, who's able to give them tanks 130 or so healing per second for all of them tanks while they're in the fight, and she has the ability to dodge away from it and keep herself alive. I feel like that she could be a huge addition to that comp specifically, as well as other comps that we'll get into later.
Okay, so first and foremost, to the Triple Tank situation, I think on maps where you especially can get in a cluster-ish engagement where it's really tight like King's Row, that's where it starts to look really good. But in the other maps and modes where it isn't as cluttered, the opportunity cost of Moira really starts to show through. There's two criticisms of the Moira pick and putting her at the top of the list that I think are important to think about. The opportunity cost, as well as the diminishing returns of having so much healing. What I mean by that is certain fights you might need a different type of utility to win them, and just raw amounts of healing doesn't do the job. For example, you might need Lucio's speed boost to get your team in position. You might need the damage amplification of Zenyatta or Mercy in different cases, and that's kind of the issue. Just pumping a ton of healing into characters is strong, but the issue with Triple Tank is that oftentimes it needs to be propped up in a bit of a different way. And the way I've seen it when the pros have been scrimming these different types of comps is that, in my opinion, I think Ana Lucio is every bit as good in that style of play as Moira is. You'll get less overall healing to multiple targets, but the burst of impact that Ana can have is comparable. And the cool thing about the upcoming meta that we're going into, a lot of it's going to come down to specific player skill and the interactions happening in between, because if you can get Sleep Dart and Anti-Nade value, you probably don't need that extra bit of multiple targets of healing, or you could possibly then build to absorb damage against the spam comp and just build Coalescence earlier than any other ultimate in the game. There's these branching off of strategies that starts to get kind of complicated, and to me, it's not necessarily that like Triple Tank is just going to be back in full effect and you can't run anything else because there's just so much healing, because there's so many other things that are good in the game. The main thing that made Triple Tank so dominant back in the day was how versatile Roadhog's hook was, because you couldn't really flank and outmaneuver outmaneuver it. Well, you can now, and there's so many other mobility, DPS, and ranged threats that you can utilize in order to really punish a tanky style comp that there's a circle metagame going on, and you can run really almost any strategy right now, it seems to me. They're all really, really strong.
Of course, all of these interactions are different as well, depending on the level of play. So as FREEDO mentioned, if you're much better at Ana, then maybe you do want to play Ana. But in matchmaking where it can feel slow sometimes, and there's a lot more poking at the choke and a lot less strategies implemented into that play, I feel like that burst healing from Moira will be enough to just be outrageous and quite easy to output as well, because she isn't extremely mechanically demanding. You know, there's a few buttons you have to get used to and knowing your cooldowns and stuff, but in general, it's really easy to put the things where you want them. You know, throw the orb in the direction of all of your tanks that are balled up. So I can definitely see that strategy being implemented at some levels of play, but of course there are other ones as well. Now, of course, there's going to be some comps where Moira would be really weak to run. I don't know if this is what we want to go into, but like trying to heal Genjis, for example. You can throw your orb into a room with a Genji, but that's not going to be as effective as just throwing on a Zenyatta Harmony orb, or even shooting the Genji with Ana, because that orb has got 300 health, yes, but then it's harder to heal other things. So if you've got flankers and stuff everywhere, Moira's not really going to have anything to heal, because she's got to be either close to them to primary heal them, or they've got to be close enough together for the healing to be valuable enough to be worth picking. You could take Zen, put your orb where you want it, and discord things, and that would be much bigger value. So I think one thing that stayed consistent in our opinion about Moira since the start is that she's going to be very team comp and map dependent, and I still think that's going to be the case, because if there's flankers everywhere, I just don't see how she can really get the healing on them often enough to keep them alive.
Right, really good point. So first, I'm going to try to isolate a few cool examples of the type of comps that do work with Moira, but then maybe branch out to talk about the other support duos that would exist to enable different types of comps. So the one that really does synergize with Moira and doesn't have the anti-synergy of having vertical mobility that dodges her healing accidentally would be rushdown comps. So to me, Lucio, Moira, Reaper, or Doomfist particularly, I know Weagle probably cringes if I mention that character's name. I think that probably could be good, I think, because any character that you can get in the muck of the fight and then have the two versions of Moira's healing hit at the same time will really get enabled. And despite the fact of Doomfist's hitbox being a little bit smaller now, I think even putting those resources into him would really be sick. But short of that, Zarya Reinhardt for sure, without a doubt, those brawling, ground-based rushdown comps are really going to see a benefit from Moira. Now, where the interplay starts to come is where the enemy might be trying to counter that with either mobility or range, and in that case, then characters like Zenyatta and Mercy start looking really good because it amplifies damage, or Mercy flies in the sky with Pharah, Zenyatta provides burst damage potential with the Discord orb, because you gotta remember, guys, it almost somewhat doesn't matter if you can continuously heal a target if the burst damage gets through to them before the healing can really take effect. You could still burst targets through with Discord potentially, even through some of this healing, which is kind of a key point, and that's how we get into this big circle meta that I'm so excited to see.
One comp I think would be interesting, but again, it might actually be overkill, would be something like Moira and Ana. The amount of healing you could actually do on them healers, it would just be nuts. It'd be hundreds of healing per second all the time. You'd have anti-nade on something, and then Moira's already 130 healing with a 50% extra. Like, that's absolutely nuts. But it does depend if it comes down to that diminishing returns when you're trying to play in matchmaking, though. That might be good enough. Being able to just keep healing forever might be enough to hold Hanamura first forever. But one thing a comp like that doesn't have is a purely defensive ultimate, and I always think to myself, I want a defensive ultimate on the team, especially in matchmaking, because they can be so helpful. When someone grabs you, you can live throughout the whole thing. You know, there's a lot of value in having that, and when the new healer was coming out, one thing I was hoping for was another defensive ult, and even though you kind of can do that with Moira, I believe she does 140 healing per second in her ult, which would be, I think, less than half of Zenyatta's. It's not quite the same thing as a defensive ult, so them two heroes together could have problems, but the amount of raw healing they can do, I think, is at least interesting to me, even if not necessarily viable.
No, you're exactly right. And I think it's kind of interesting the design that Blizzard took with this, with the healers that have more powerful mid-fight healing have weaker ultimates in a way, at least defensively speaking. They're more offensive geared, which is a cool little thing about how those are designed. But I would say this is how I would explain it. Whenever your team already has the ground they want and they can play really defensively and keep those healers alive, pumping that healing in would work. So if you're backed up into your spawn, like let's say defending Numbani last, and there's not really anywhere to go or any reason to take much ground, and you're just waiting for the engagement to come and are going to catch the engagement and try to keep everybody alive as fast as you can, that mid-fight healing could look really good, and then where you're going to struggle is trying to figure out what to deal with the enemy's offensive tools when they're going to have a big ult fight. But conversely, when like you're playing out in open space, let's say taking Li Jiang, trying to cross that bridge everybody knows about so much, if you don't have speed boost, you're going to really be struggling to get into the engagement in time, and by the time you get there, you might be getting booped off anyway, right, by either Pharah or Lucio. So these different aspects of the game, it's really going to come down to utilizing the thing that fits for that map to enable your team and to disable the enemy's team whenever possible. Okay, now I think we want to get into talking about where you don't want to be picking Moira, and to me it always comes down to the opportunity cost of her limitations. Moira's never really a bad pick, because if you have good mobility with her and you know how to position, you can get in and out of the fight and manage your resources almost no matter what your teammates are doing, unless Pharah's flying in the sky or Genji's too high for you. In those specific cases, you're probably going to be able to find healing value and be providing something to the team. The issue comes in when the enemy flankers are too good and you can't really get away from them, and a Lucio being able to either boop the Dragon Blade or speed boost your off healer out of the way in order to stay alive in that case, or the defensive ult situation, that's where it starts to really add up, and you have to start to think if you need something extra. Is your Pharah or your ranged hit scan player struggling to kill the enemy Pharah, or perhaps in a certain duel like that? Maybe going Mercy in order to damage amp and pocket that DPS is going to be the trick. Moira is a ground-based brawling type healer, and she really succeeds in sieging those tanky barrier comps or enabling those ground-based brawling characters, Zarya, Reaper, like I said before, Roadhog as well, any of those really annoying characters that just can fight forever on the ground if you put resources into them. That's where she's going to be key, but her weaknesses are in what she doesn't bring in comparison to the other supports. She doesn't really have them by herself. However, maybe we'll talk about now characters that are really good at shutting her down in isolation, like counters that you might want to pick in order to go hunt down the enemy Moira if she's getting way too much value.
I think one thing's for sure is that I don't think most characters really want to 1v1 Moira. I mean, you definitely need something that's going to burst her down. So if you're going in with Tracer, you know, you need to hit your shots, get a melee off and kill her quickly. You need to hit a stun with McCree or something like that, because if there's a soldier trying to fight you, you can do very similar horrible movement with Moira, where you can like duck under the bullets and move to the side. And while you're doing your primary fire, even though it's really weak with her, it will drain their health and give it to you. So I believe you get 33 healing per second or something. So if a soldier's trying to kill you at that kind of like 15, 20 foot range and you can still zap him, it's a really horrible fight for a soldier to get into. So you really need to make sure you like pounce her and kill her and she's gone like that. Because if you don't, her ability to fade away, get behind her team again, and then prop them up and keep herself alive, I think, it rivals almost like Lucio in a way, where you can keep yourself alive, but she is a bit easier to hit, and she doesn't have quite the utility other people do, so it's slightly different. But anything that bursts something down, getting a pick with Widow or a Hanzo scatter, anything like that, I think is a really hard counter to her. And any of the kind of chip damage heroes are going to see struggles against Moira.
No, you're exactly right. In that Soldier versus Moira duel, unless your aim is flawless with this primary fire, I think you'll be surprised how long it's actually going to take you to just fight her 1v1. And if it takes you that long to kill a support, I mean, it's almost not even worth shooting at. You really are going to have to hit that Helix, because her damage isn't negligible because it's so reliable. That's kind of the issue. Players that play characters that are used to getting away really easily, like Genji or Mercy flying through the sky especially, the really reliable drain damage that she has is something that you have to be afraid of somewhat, especially because it gives her health. So in the same way where I think she enables those ground-based brawling characters, ones that aren't really going to be hurt by that drain, but also can have enough damage to just burn her down, are going to be really good. Tracer one-clipping is probably going to be a thing as well, but also characters like Reaper or ranged pick-off characters. If you can hit the headshot with Hanzo and Widowmaker, her head hitbox is a bit bigger, and the animations she does are easy-ish to hit if she's not actively juking you, I think. She's kind of got that soldier effect, like you said. So finding whatever your sweet spot DPS is to really be able to disable her will make the team comp kind of fall apart, especially in those cases where the enemy is utilizing her to prop up a brawly ground-based comp. Because once those characters lose their lifeline, automatically they start looking weaker. So if you got the Roadhog, Reaper, or whatever on the enemy team, taking away those resources that make them extra good is what is going to be the win condition, whereas other DPSs don't need as much pocketing in order to see value. That's kind of how that works.
I think if you made it this far into the video, we'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on Moira. To throw this opinion out there, I really like her. I think, personally, I don't know how FREEDO feels about this, that we may have a Anna effect where she releases and we don't realize how strong she is for a while. As we say, she's not as every situation as Anna was, but I think her burst healing is insane, and I think that in matchmaking she's going to be extremely strong after a few weeks when people really learn to utilize her. I'm not calling for a nerf yet, I'm just saying keep your eye out, because I think realistically she might be really, really strong when she comes out, which I think is good. I always advocate for new heroes being strong, so I'm looking forward to it.
I think the key difference maker is really utilizing that fast charging ultimate, because any ult that charges that fast can win team fights convincingly in certain scenarios, and that's going to be the key. But to outplay that as well, that means you got to be careful spamming into those chokes if the enemy has a Moira, and expect that coalescence to be coming in about 30 seconds if you are doing so and they're sustaining up, which is the base playstyle of matchmaking anyway, so I think it's something you're going to be used to quite quickly in ranked, because it's going to be quite effective at lashing out against those choke spam holds that the enemy defense often gets away with. So with all that being said, that's where we think the Moira meta is going. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Are you excited for this sort of triangle meta of supports to finally exist, where choice seems to be an option, or perhaps are you leaning towards Moira going to be a must-pick sooner rather than later when everyone realizes how sick some of her abilities are? Let us know your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. If you haven't already, please subscribe, because we upload each and every day, so you're going to want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out all sorts of cool stuff, including sick clips from matchmaking. Liam tweeted out a clip where he slept a Valkyrie Mercy off the map that if you haven't seen, you have to go check out. So that's been it for us from your Moira Watch. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.